We want to bring in someone who understands the food supply chain very well. We are joined by Matt Wadiak, who is the founder and former COO of Blue Apron. He's now the founder and CEO of Cook's Venture. Matt, great to speak with you once again. Hope all is well with you. We have to know and kind of start the conversation off with what regenerative agriculture is and what issues you presently see in our food supply chain that need fixing.
Yeah, thanks for having me back. Regenerative agriculture is a big word, and a lot of folks are still trying to get their heads around what that exactly means. What is organic? What is sustainable? What is regenerative? And a really simple way to think about it is regenerative agriculture is simply improving the quality of soil over time. So you think about what's sustainable is sustaining a status quo. What is regenerative is planting crops in the right rotations, using land and animals to work together, and creating systems that improve the quality of our land, which we frankly have been deteriorating for a long time. For 70 years, we've been in this industrial system, we've been degrading our soil, and now it's time to build it back.
And so, as we are seeing even more technology being fused into the process of agriculture and farming more broadly, how do we make sure that even with that new technology that the foods that we're consuming are even more healthy going forward from here?
Yeah, so it's a really good question. And, there's a lot of information out there about, different kinds of foods and foods grown for human consumption. But the reality is that over 90% of agriculture in America is really growing grain for feeding animals and creating ethanol. So one of the most important things that we can do as we're thinking about eating healthier foods and creating a healthier environment to live in is supporting systems that grow diversified, healthier grain that get us away from this corn and soy and ethanol economy that not only is really bad for the environment, but we've been subsidizing it with our taxes now for, since World War II. So moving towards systems where we're growing small grains that are used to feed animals of greater diversity, of greater ecological diversity, and of greater biological diversity, as opposed to these industrial breeds of animals and industrial breeds of crops, is increasingly important to reduce the use of synthetic inputs like Roundup, glyphosate, dicamba, neonicotinoids, all of the bad stuff that gets sprayed on land all over the world. So that's really what is important for us to think about is the food that we're actually see in the grocery store predominantly only comprises about 3% of American ag. The produce, the vegetables, the fruits, the nuts, all that stuff. The rest of it is really all grain that we're growing for these industrial systems.
That's critical and great background for us to also kind of carry forward with the investments that we've seen and the discussion around that. Getting back to the headline that we led off this conversation with, the Biden administration announcing an investment of $4 billion to strengthen supply chains, including animal agriculture. Is this $4 billion marker, is that something that is enough, and if so, for how long of a time period, and what should more investments look like, not just from the administration, but in more of a kind of private and public sector partnership on this effort?
Yeah, that's a great question, and we have seen a lot more private equity money and VC money go into better agriculture and ESG kind of companies. $4 billion is a good start. It's the tip of the iceberg. We've been pumping billions and billions and billions of dollars into industrial ag now for, like I said before, decades. And that money, primarily goes to pay for corn and soy, for the most part, below the cost of production. The people that benefit from that are the manufacturers of these synthetic inputs and ammonium nitrate fertilizer and things like that. So it's critical that we put more money in the hands of folks who are building regional food systems, who are building regional processing. And of course, all of that is supported through growing better grain, healthier, more diverse grain. We currently do not have subsidies in place for growing better grains and small grains. Our current funding under previous administrations, including Secretary Vilsack himself, has been leaning towards, during the Obama and Trump administration under Sonny Perdue, continuing to fuel these, sort of big industrial mechanisms. We saw during COVID how fragile our ecosystem is, how many animals we lost, how much farmers suffered in our country, and continuing to build better, more robust regional systems is increasingly important. And here's the bottom line, and this is really what counts. We have a system in our country where the people growing food, our farmers growing crops, our farmers growing animals for us, and people working at our plants are food insecure themselves. And what's the real cost of food if the people that are making food for our country can't afford to eat it?
Wow. And so, that is so jarring to hear. And with the amount of focus that is on the partnerships that these farms rely on for their businesses with restaurants, with other larger national chains, so that they could sell directly into, and even in some international partnerships as well. Where do you kind of look at some of the, I guess I'll approach it from the international side since I left off with that. Where do you look at some of the trade negotiations that still need to take place at this point in time to really chart forward a clearer path for farmers that are here in the U.S. To be able to base some of their business on international policy, that they have no say in that discussion outside of being able to push on their local politician to prioritize that at the highest levels in Washington?
It's true. There really is not a good conduit to conversations between Washington and regional producers today, which is really a problem. So I think as you saw, and if you haven't read the press release regarding the $4 billion, it's focused on four things: food production, food processing, food distribution and aggregation, and markets and consumers. And essentially, what it boils down to is we need to build regional systems that are robust to create food security. As we saw during the pandemic, we had kinks in supply chain all over the place. A lot of that is controlled by foreign trade, trade with China, trade with Brazil, because a lot of our grain, folks don't realize, is coming in from Brazil and Eastern Europe and going out to China, as well as a lot of the commodities we produce: pork, beef, chicken, etc. And there just are not regional systems set up right now, both domestically and globally, to support these systems more robustly, with more security. And then additionally, I think you made a very good point. We just don't have a good conduit to have these conversations at a governmental level. And, the companies that have the biggest lobbyists end up being the ones who traditionally have been the most funded. And we know that that system doesn't work anymore. So this is a step in the right direction. I would love to see more, by the way, of how do we have productive conversations around building these systems,
Sure.
both domestically and internationally.
How are smaller and medium-sized businesses, especially in this industry, in the agriculture industry and farming industry, how are they able to kind of infuse some of the new technology? We know that App Harvest is using recycled rainwater to grow tomatoes indoors, controlled environment farming. And how are they able to leverage some of that technology, and where, in not being able to infuse that into their operations, are they missing out on opportunities to ramp up and scale up production, even as we are seeing some of these new partnerships formulated?
Yeah, I think the main thing is that there's a lack of dollars out there, and some of those indoor systems are okay, but on a whole, really what we need are bigger investments into alternative grain, ecosystems in which where farmers have the ability to plant small grains and not be penalized for it, where we have a chance to buy farming equipment for more regenerative crops and organic systems that improve the quality of soil and improve the quality of jobs for our farmers and their pay, obviously.
Right.
And right now, for example, I'll give you a good example of this. If you want to grow a cover crop in the U.S., there is a tiny subsidy for that. Cover crops help to sequester carbon and keep roots intact and build biological matter in soil. It's very important. But you're not allowed to sell it. So why are farmers penalized to do something that's good and rewarded for growing conventional GMO corn and soy? And it's because we've had policy which has been really in the back pocket of these big industry powers to be, like Monsanto, Bayer Crop Science, John Deere, etc., and creating alternatives for small farmers to have better vertical infrastructure in milling, in growing their food, in feeding animals, and then processing those animals with quality jobs is increasingly important. And the bottom line is, it comes down to dollars and cents. It comes down to investment. It comes down into building these vertical systems that work together efficiently, where you grow the grain, you feed better animals of more diversified breeds, and you process them in plants where people make better wages, plain and simple.
Certainly. Matt, thanks so much for helping us break all this down. It's always a pleasure to speak with you and get some of your insights and perspective around the industry as a whole. So thanks for joining us this morning. And don't be surprised if our on-demand team reaches out about cover crops, because that's extremely interesting to me as well. That's Matt Wadiak, who is the founder and former COO of Blue Apron. He's now the founder and CEO of Cook's Venture. Thanks so much, Matt.